Okay, hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about different types of modality and how we can draw certain analogies or parallels between those different types of modality. So in the diagram you can see on the screen we have in the first we have the value of that modality. So one is the upper limit or the positive extreme of modality 0 to 1 to 0 to 9, 0.1 to 0.9 is the in-between on the spectrum, in between the upper and lower limit, and 0 of course is the lower limit or the negative extreme of that modality. So first we have logical modality, or the general usual modality, what's usually understood as modality when we talk about modal logic and stuff like that. So on the upper extreme we have necessity or necessary truths, right? Necessary propositions, necessary states of affairs, where what is necessary cannot not be. So there's a contradiction in the non-being of what is necessary. So if something is necessary, then it's certainly actual. We can infer actuality from something's being necessary. So in between we have what is called a possible. So possible is something that is neither necessary nor impossible, but there is no contradiction in its being actual. So it can be, but doesn't have to be. So if something is possible and actual, we call that contingent. And if something is possible and non-actual, that is simply, an open possibility which is not yet actualized or never may be actualized, but it can be actualized. So then we have the impossible. And impossible is something that contains a contradiction within it. So, for example, a wooden iron or married bachelor, or perhaps round square would be a contradiction in terms of which cannot possibly exist, right? So the necessary would be tautologies, possible would be contingent propositions, and impossible would be the contradictory state of affairs. So then we have epistemic. The epistemic modality I have split into subjective and objective. So in the subjective we have what refers to the states of the subject, certain internal psychic elements of the subject that we can evaluate epistemically. So first of all we have certain or conclusive beliefs, which is the upper limit, the positive extreme of modality, epistemic modality. So if the beliefs are certain, then the person has a maximum or at least a very high degree of conviction about that belief, which does not necessarily imply the truth of that belief, but because that is the subjective counterpart of the objective epistemic status of beliefs. Then we have the rational but uncertain. So there are certain beliefs that we can believe. We are not irrational to believe, but still we don't have any conclusive evidence to show that those beliefs are true. So we are not justified in holding those beliefs as being certain or necessarily true, but we can still believe them. We can still at least entertain them, right? Because their irrationality has not been proven, their falsity has not been proven. So we have the rational, which are beliefs that we have conclusive evidence against. So if we have certain evidence against a certain belief, which proves to everyone's satisfaction, or at least satisfaction of all rational beings, that belief is false, then we are not justified in holding that belief, and we are irrational in holding it. Then we have the epistemic or objective epistemic modality, or which concerns the objective epistemic status of our beliefs. So we have true beliefs, which count as knowledge if we are justified also in believing them. But those beliefs that have been sufficiently proven or have conclusive and I would say unrevisable and uncriticizable evidence for them, at least that would be a very extreme form of epistemic standard. But those beliefs we know to be true. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that they are true. At least in that conception, we can have perhaps some revisionary or some provisional beliefs, but this is the absolute conception. So we have the possibly true but uncertain beliefs, which may or may not be true. So it cannot be decided rationally whether they are true or not true. But perhaps we have some evidence in their favor, maybe some evidence against them, but neither is conclusive. And we have the false beliefs, which are the beliefs where we can conclusively prove that they are false, that do not correspond to reality, because we have sufficient evidence against them. Then we have the Deontic modality, which refers to the moral status, or it's sort of moral modality, where we have the obligatory actions that are obligatory are actions that are morally necessary. So something that we must or ought to do, however you prefer those terms. So if we must do something, we can be held responsible. We can perhaps be punished or held to have committed a certain a moral transgression if we do not do them. So perhaps if we see a child drowning in the river, perhaps we have a moral obligation to help that child. So if we do not, then we can be held morally responsible and praised negatively, or I guess depraised, or evaluated negatively. Actions can be evaluated negatively, or our personal character can be evaluated negatively if we do not do those obligatory actions. Then we have the permissible actions, which I can give an example. Perhaps you sitting on a bench in a park and drinking soda, right? So there's nothing morally wrong with that type of action, but still nobody can expect that of us. Nobody can hold us responsible for doing that. Well, I guess either positively or negatively, because that action neither is obligatory nor forbidden. So it's simply permissible, right? And then we have the forbidden or impermissible actions, which are those actions that are morally forbidden or morally impossible. So it's impossible for you to be morally flawless while doing those actions. So perhaps an example would be stealing a TV from your neighbor, which is not acceptable in any circumstances. Well, I guess there are some conceivable circumstances, but there are always counterexamples to pretty much any of these examples, but we can remain with that for now. And at last we have the propositional modality, so to speak, which regards the relations between propositions. So there are, at least according to Robert Brandom, there are only three possible relations between propositions. So one proposition can imply another. So if the implication is, I guess tautology would be even more extreme than implication, but I guess that all logical implications are tautologies, right? So if something implies something else logically, then that is a necessary truth, that is a logical tautology. And then we have the compatibility relation, where two propositions can both be true. There's no contradiction in them both being true at the same time. So they are compatible. They can coexist. They can both be true. And we have the incompatibility, where there is a certain logical relation of contradiction between two propositions, where one proposition implies the falsity of another. The truth of one proposition implies the falsity of another, and vice versa. So that will be the incompatibility relation between propositions. So as an addendum or appendix to this, I could add the additional note that those in-between values of modality, so the non-extreme values of modality, admit of certain, well, I guess gradations or degrees, right? So in the epistemic modalities, we can have the less probable or less likely, and more probable or more likely beliefs. So beliefs that are more likely or less likely to be true, basically. And with the deontic modality, we perhaps can have a fourth deontic category besides obligation, permissibility, and forbidding what is forbidden. So we can have perhaps the category of omissible, or those things that are advisable, or I guess praiseworthy, but are not obligatory. So perhaps we can have you can add positive moral value to a person's character to do certain actions, like perhaps giving to charity, donating to charity, but those are not really obligatory. At least we can look at it like that. Perhaps, for example, people like Peter Singer would say that we are actually obligated to do even those things which are usually considered merely admissible, praiseworthy, but not obligatory. So he would say that we are also obliged to donate to charity all of our money, which transcends our basic necessities. So basically, if we have coffee at a luxurious restaurant, that is actually a morally bad thing to do, because we could give that money to people who need it more, or for the securing of more needed goods than is that coffee, or maybe a newest car, or a newest mobile phone, or whatever else it may be. But I guess with propositional modality, I don't see how we can talk of degrees of, for example, compatibility. So, two propositions are either compatible, not compatible. Perhaps they can be partly compatible if they're complex propositions. So one part of the proposition is maybe compatible with another, but the other part isn't. But if we're talking about atomic propositions, there can be no degrees of compatibility, or even implication or incompatibility. So those are the only three possible propositional modalities. Okay, so that has been it for this video. I hope you found it informative and interesting. And until next time, bye bye.